All right, everyone, the red light is on and we are recording. This is Mark back for another episode of the Veteran Semi-Professional. So today's an interview episode where I'm interviewing a veteran about their life and career after the military, all in an effort to help you if you are maybe still in the service or recently transitioned and you're trying to figure out, what do I do once I can put my hands back in my pockets, grow my hair out, and start wearing these things called quote unquote civilian clothes. This is a show for you. So I talk to people about, their personal transition story. We try and highlight the good, bad, and the ugly. That way you can figure out how to have the best exit and the best landing for you and your family after the military. So I'm super pumped for today's guest, an incredibly successful guy. He was recommended to me by another guest. And so really excited to share his story today. So Adam, if you take a minute, introduce yourself, I'd really appreciate it.
Hey, hello out there to all your listeners. Let me give a little hoo-ah to all my Army brothers and sisters. Go Army, beat Navy. Yeah, okay, I like Navy boys too. But hey, listen, it's good to be here. Glad to be talking to call it where I started, to all my brothers and sisters out there who are serving. Thank you for your service. Thank you for standing watch on Freedom's Gate today.
Yeah, and for all those who are just listening right now and not seeing the video, I mean, he's wearing an Army shirt right now. He's got like a big veteran, board up behind him, got American flag and everything. So tell this is a guy who's like super passionate about like this audience and his personal story in the military and everything. So appreciate that intro, Adam. What did you do in the Army?
I was when I was coming out of high school back. This is I'm going to date myself. This is so long ago. Ronald Reagan was president of the United States. Let's start there. So we're talking 1980s, parachute pants, big hair. The tagline for the service back then was the Army, a great place to start. And that's how I was looking at the service going in. It was really, I was there. I didn't want to go to college right out of high school. I was an electronics guy. I was building Heath kits. I was a ham radio operator. I was doing all kinds of things with electronics in high school. And so I was looking for a really long technical school. And I looked at all four of the branches of service. I literally maxed my ASVAB entrance exam. I was qualified for any MOS in the military. And so I looked for what's the longest school. What's the longest technical school I could find? It was MOS 27 November. It was Forward Area Alerting Radar Repair. So classified air defense, forward air defense radar systems that were tied back in those days to Chaparral, Vulcan, Red Eye, and call it the forward area defenses. And I was in the 2nd Armored Division, so it was a heavy armored division. And so that was really it. I went to basic training at Fort McClellan. I think I'm still picking red Alabama clay out of my scalp every once in a while, even though it's been like 40 years ago. And really, it was a great place to start for me. So I went in with the right attitude. I'm here to go to school. I'm here to learn a skill. I completed a 5,000-hour journeyman program while I was in, and I essentially came out as what was known in that day as an engineer by trade. So engineering jobs, either you had a professional, you were a professional engineer and you had a 4-year degree, or you were engineer by trade, and that was me. So went in looking for a skill, and was 27 November, working on radar systems, back in the Cold War era of Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev.
So this is just for my own edification. I think you mentioned you were putting together Heath kits. What are...
Yeah, so back in I'm dating myself again, but back in the day, if you were like a ham radio dude, so you played with radios, and antennas, and you're talking around the world, Morse code, and what have you, you could build your own transmitters, build your own receivers. There was a company called Heath Kit out of Benton Harbor, Michigan, and literally you could get stereos, televisions, and they were build it yourself. So they were like do it yourself kits. So I was soldering, I was building electronic kits back in the day, and really kind of developed a knack for electronics, keeping in mind this is really pre-computers. This is pre-big tech,
Yeah.
and so it was early and had a lot of great skills in electronics.
Fascinating. Yeah, I was an infantry officer, so if I was usually doing anything to electronics, it was usually breaking them instead of repairing them. And I think if any of my guys ever saw me around something with a soldering iron, they'd been like, "Oh no, get away," because this is going to go very, very poorly.
Well,
Yeah.
my school was at NASA at Marshall Space Flight Center. We were actually certified soldering. They looked at
Oh,
our
right
solder
on.
joints
Yeah,
with microscopes because missiles don't like to fly with bad solder joints.
that
So,
makes sense. That makes sense.
yeah.
That,
So,
well, so I want to ask, like, your own. I know it was some years ago now, but like, what was your personal transition from the army like? Good, bad, and ugly. And maybe like, what were some speed bumps that you experienced that you might want to point out for people coming in behind you?
I'm going to share some dirty laundry here. So, I was soldier of the cycle in basic training. I was number one in my class in AIT. And in 1984, I was soldier of the year for the 2nd Armored Division, 3 Corps in Fort Hood. And I think everybody had thought I was a lifer and that I would just re-up. I had a chance to go to USMAPS, on an active duty scholarship. But you had to be single, and I was engaged to be married. So I actually turned it down. And, when it was time to get out, I think everybody thought someone else had already talked to me and, had already signed me back up. And, it's like kind of like I ETS'd very quietly. And, before anybody looked around, it's like, hey, where's Sergeant Coffey? Oh, he's out. He's gone. It's like, I really didn't. I was chasing two things, when I went in the military: money and title, and so military was not a place I was going to get wealthy. Obviously, you could retire early. That was like one of my other goals was,
Sure.
to earn a living for a family I didn't have yet, and then also retire early. But so I knew I was going to get out. I went to school. I learned. I checked my boxes because I was there. I made it to CEO. I made it to to where I am today without the military. And I tell people the military taught me something about discipline, teamwork, and leadership. The military created the concept of servant leadership before there was a word for it. I mean, that's what the military taught. So I got out of the military what I was looking to get. ETS'd very quietly, uneventfully, moved back home to Michigan, and started a career in electronics. And I remember, I was an engineer working on CAT scanners, and I remember the hiring manager, looking at my resume. I checked none of his boxes, absolutely none. But he looked at me, and he was a former infantry officer. He was a captain, been a company commander. And he looked at me, and he looked at my resume, and he said, I don't care. I know what it takes to be soldier of the year. I know what it,
Right.
I know you're going to show up to work on time. I'll train the rest. You've been working on multi-million-dollar, secret radar systems, and I'm sure I can teach you CAT scanners. And so he hired me. Military guy hires military guy because he could connect with me and the experiences that I had. So I would say I got out quietly. And I had a good, smooth, easy transition because someone valued my military experience, that was on the resume. And I'll never forget getting out of the service, where people on base were trying to help you write resumes and what have you. And they're like, oh, you don't need to say this. No one cares you were soldier of the year. No one cares. You don't need a picture with your, with your resume, all that stuff. And it's like, you know what? I got hired because I put the stuff on there that every other resume they said take off. So I would say, hey, trust your instincts on what might be important to a potential employer. A bunch of boring resumes is hard to distinguish in a pile, but Sergeant Coffey, soldier of the year, blah, 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 got the job, because of the military experience. So I'd say I had a very smooth transition. Sorry, no horror stories other than I snuck out when no one was looking and they thought I had already re-enlisted.
Well, I'll tell you a few things. So, one, I've heard that a number of times, like a similar path of my first job was another veteran hired me into something, and I didn't check all of the boxes that necessarily were on the job description. But that person, that the member of the vet net, as I always like to call it, they knew what it took for me to get to where I was in my military career, and they looked at this and said, like, yes, I get that you don't necessarily have the exact skills or experience that we're looking for, but I know what it took for you to get to where where you got in the military. and I can shape you to where I need you to be in this new role. And I know you're going to bring the hard work and discipline and teamwork and everything that is a lot harder for me to pin down as a hiring manager. But I feel a lot more confident as that with you coming in. So I say that for everyone listening, that can be a good first step if you can find that veteran in the company you're trying to get into, or find the right person who understands your background. Like they'll be willing to take more of a risk on you. And then the last bit on there, like the soldier of the year piece, I think is a great example of we as veterans often tend to undersell ourselves and not think that what we did was an accomplishment or was not a big deal. And we think like, oh, no one in corporate America cares about being soldier of the year for the Corps or whatever. No, like you were someone who stood out amongst some of the best people in your unit. And even if necessarily, that doesn't directly translate into like whatever their job skills are, companies are always looking for people who want to excel and push themselves and are looking, willing to do what it takes to achieve something. And when you say I was soldier of the year over XYZ number of people, that's an impressive accomplishment. You shouldn't be scared to highlight something like that. So I appreciate you sharing that story with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So your first job after the Army was CAT scanners. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was, call it in the military, I was your cable TV repairman, right? I worked on radar systems, missile systems, carry a toolbox, carry an M16,
Yeah.
But in my first civilian job, it was, literally, working on multi-million-dollar CAT scanners. And I'll never forget, I picked it up very quickly. Within a year, I was a national support engineer for the company. And what it was, I found that an air defense radar system and a CAT scanner are almost identical in every aspect. One takes pictures of the sky and paints a picture on a screen of aircraft that are flying around. One takes a picture of the human body, and you've got a rotating antenna for an RF in a radar system. You've got a rotating gantry in a CAT scanner that has an X-ray tube flying around. Literally, the only difference was the frequency at which they operated. So I was a natural at making the transition from radar systems to CAT scanners. And that led me to, call it a first career as an engineer, working on CAT scanners, MRIs, superconducting magnets in a hospital type environment. And it was while I was working as an engineer at General Electric in the healthcare division that I crossed over from engineering into business and went to GE Crotonville, which is kind of at the time, the world's most admired MBA program. It wasn't an MBA, and it was during the Camelot era of Jack Welch. And the last 10 years, stock was splitting every 2.5 years. As a young guy, I just looked up and I thought money rained from the skies because I was getting stock options and they were doubling in value every 2.5 years. And so it was kind of a magical Camelot era time for me. And so where the military taught me discipline, teamwork, and leadership, engineering made me a meticulous planner. GE then taught me how to run a business. And at the time, they were the world's most admired company, all before the tech giants, evolved. And it was just a magical era in business.
What do you think was special about their particular program? Because it wasn't necessarily from a, big elite business school or, some higher institution of learning or something like that. It was, an internal unit within the organization that was training, the next generation of business leaders. Like, do you remember what were what was it about the Kool-Aid there? What was the magic sauce you thought that made it such a great educational experience within the company?
Yeah. So back in that day, GE Crotonville, airplanes, or I'm sorry, helicopters were coming up the Hudson River, motorcades, leaders of the different GE businesses and Fortune 500 leaders from other companies were actually teaching, call it the cream of the crop at GE. So GE had this thing back in the day, code one performer, and it's like ABC player. You may have heard that term before. And I was there for 10 years and I was a code one performer, top 5% all 10 years. And so, it was the cream of the crop that was call it mentored and developed. It's a complete college campus that sits on the Hudson River in Crotonville. And, it was a special time because it was true Fortune 500 business leaders who were teaching classes and giving you their insights on how to run a global business one day. And I think that made it special. And at the time, GE was performing so well and the most admired company on the planet that a lot of other corporations were seeking to emulate the Crotonville kind of management experience. And then meanwhile, other employers were also trying to pick off GE Crotonville grads and hire them away and promote them. And so GE is a place that really valued people who were exiting the military. I'll just go and start there. I did a lot of work with them on their JMO program, the Junior Military Officer program. And I'd go down to San Diego and I would sit in a hotel room, at a trade show, whatever, and we would interview kind of people who were getting out of the service. And so GE really valued what the military brought to the table in terms of teamwork, discipline, and leadership. And, so from an officer, perspective, obviously educated, college degreed, they kind of fed them into the management program. Enlisted folks were being groomed for other roles within the organization, depending on what skill set or MOS that they held. In my case, I had already made the transition to engineer. And even though I was enlisted, I worked on the JMO program at GE for a while. So GE really, really valued the military vet coming out of the service.
And it was at your time, like when you're at GE, that I think like the next phase of your career got started. Is that correct? If my internet research is correct here, someone came out and said, "Hey, Adam, we see you've been crushing it at GE for a while. Do you want to kind of go do something else?" Is that right?
Yeah, my career took off. I was a really good engineer and I did really well. And it was kind of a scary time to transition from engineering to being a manager, because now I am competing with the Harvard MBAs, of the world. And, it's taking me out of my comfort zone, and I went to Crotonville and then became a turnaround guy within GE, and they'd give me something broken, I'd fix it. And then they'd give me something bigger that was broken and I'd fix it. And, I was getting schooling, I was getting great education and great practical experience. And then recruiters started calling, so again, it was kind of the Crotonville experience. You're a GE Crotonville guy, you're an up and comer, rising talent, code one performer. I want to hire you. And that launched me off into a career. Actually, I spent 21 years as the CEO of 3 different national companies, 9 different private equity firms. 2 of my companies hit billion-dollar, valuations. I did 58 acquisitions, while building these companies. And so GE prepared me. Military, again, teamwork, discipline, leadership, engineering, meticulous planner. GE taught me how to run a business, and then came a 21-year career as CEO of 3 different national companies with thousands of not to sound sexist, but guys, trucks, broken stuff. A medical services company, a commercial laundry services company, an HVAC and refrigeration services company. And so engineers, guys in trucks, building things, fixing things. And it was a great run. So I did that for 21 years, and then I got bored and needed a new challenge. Was bored running one company, wanted to be able to help multiple companies. And so I just recently pivoted and became a consultant.
Well, first, the first thing I want to highlight about your story for everyone listening here is that I think, especially when we all get out of the military, we want the world to, we want to get everything now, right now. Like, just got out yesterday, cool. I want to be where, Adam is after 20 years removed from the military today. And I think it's important to remember like that scope of time of, it takes time to build the skills, the relationships, the knowledge, the experience and everything, so that then, and then you pair that with, the skills and experience you got from the military. That's when then like the recruiters start calling you. That's when then someone says, "Hey, wow, okay, this guy's got like that extra secret sauce that I think probably came from time in the military, and he's matching that then with practical experience in the business world or as an engineer or whatever. And oh wow, that's a really powerful combination." Like, and then like that's when opportunities can really start to open up for you. So I just say it's for everyone listening, of having that kind of broader span of time and like the patience with your career and like that is a really important thing, I think, to digest and remember.
If I could give you one just bit of advice looking back, I'd look back at my time in the military, and there were really 2 kinds of people who were in the military. Those who went in with a very defined set of goals and objectives for what they wanted to accomplish in the military. And then there were those who just kind of went in because it was something to do, and they just kind of hung out, and they spent their time. And when you get out of the service, then I think the person who really thought about, what do I want to be? What MOS? What's going to help me, from a career perspective later? Am I going in for life, or am I just going in for one or two hitches, and I'm looking to gain experience? And I think the more effort you put into the time you are in the military, when you're in the military, you spend every day counting the days until you get out, talking about can't wait to get out. Once you get out, you spend the rest of your life being proud that you were in. You forget about the crap, and all you remember are the relationships, the friendships, the camaraderie, and the good stories, and the bad just kind of fails, and floats away. So I would tell people, while you're still in, it's really have a plan. What are you trying to accomplish in life, and how is the military going to help you do that? And if you can do that early, then it really becomes a great stepping stone to what's next in your life.
I think it's a great frame of reference for everybody, even if you're, getting out next month, or, you just started your first enlistment, whatever it may be. I think it's a great way to frame how you view, your career, your military career, and kind of how that shapes into the rest of your life. Well, I want to go back to this. You said you've been, crushing it for a long time, and then you got bored. How did getting bored come around, and how did you start recognizing that I think I want to get into something else right now?
It happens slowly, over time. So I'm doing the same thing. Essentially, I'm taking companies, I'm growing them. I'm buying other companies, mergers and acquisitions, and putting them together. I'm building billion-dollar businesses. I'm employing thousands of people, and I'm working in different industries, which kept it interesting for a while. But eventually, it's just kind of like, if you're doing the same job every day for 21 years, it's like eventually, it's like I need a new challenge. Along the way, I started teaching. And became a guest speaker, working with some professors at places like UCLA and Pepperdine, and really enjoyed that. When I was younger, you couldn't get me to stay in a classroom. As I got older, it's like I really enjoyed giving back to what I'll call the next generation of business leaders. So I was working with executive MBAs at UCLA. I was mentoring a lot of people. Speaking to a lot of people, still interact with a lot of people, then decided, hey, I want to be an alumnus of UCLA, and, wanted to do the executive program myself, just to be more connected to that process. And so I developed, a knack for kind of teaching, imparting knowledge, wisdom, whatever you want to call it. And then I wrote 2 #1 best-selling books, business books. And, now I'm hearing from people all around the globe, who are my one of my books, the first book actually that I wrote almost 4 years ago now, still pops on #1 on Amazon all the time in different business categories. It's got a little bit of a cult following out there, teaching people private equity. And so, there's been be the CEO, grow businesses, do some teaching, write some books. And I'm like, okay, I want to impact multiple companies at a time. Why run one? I want to help, 7, 8, 9 at a time be successful. And so, there in the world of consulting, there are those who teach from a theoretical perspective, and then there are those who have been there, done that. And so just like the rest of my career, I called myself a blue collar CEO because I tended to run companies that had blue collar employees in trucks out doing things, building things and fixing things. And, I started, I was a private E1. When I looked up in basic training, I saw the bubble gum on the bottom of somebody else's shoe. I started life at the bottom. I worked my way up. I held every job a person can hold in a service company, and then spent 20 years running them, and decided I'm going to start helping multiple business owners at a time. And so I left the corporate world. I had made a ton of money, over a 20 plus year career. And so I wanted to replace my CEO income without being a CEO. Check, managed to do that, created a 7-figure business in 7 months after leaving the CEO seat. I'm serving on boards of multiple companies right now. I'm teaching, getting ready to start doing some seminar work. I've been working on a 12-hour masterclass on growth and private equity and alternative assets. and how to grow businesses, launching some of that and just having fun now. I'm back to where I'm having fun. I'm working with CEOs and I'm bringing to them 20 years worth of experience building billion-dollar companies. And the businesses I'm working with are much smaller and aspiring to be that bigger business. And, typical company for me probably has 20 to 30 million in revenue up to a couple hundred million. And I'm working with those CEOs and helping them build billion-dollar businesses, with the kind of the tools and tricks of the trade that I've learned over the last 20 years. And so that's what I'm doing now. And it's been fun and rewarding, and I'm getting used to it. And then you're looking at my home office, this is it. It's like, it's me, me, myself, and I is the company. And, I go from 3,000 employees and, a whole executive admin staff to now I'm booking everything myself and, figuring it out as a sole proprietor, if you will.
Yeah. Well, the amount you're able to do is just incredibly impressive to me. I mean, both just like the whole career you've had, putting together two amazing books, the teaching, the putting together courses, and then putting all together the sales pipeline and the processes and everything that go into a consulting business and everything. Just super impressive. Just want to put that out there. I'm kind of curious if someone, so you kind of describe, a business that might work with you somewhere between 20 million to 100 million, or say, we'll say, what are some of the stumbling blocks for someone who's at a $20 million business and stopping them to getting to that $100 million business? Because, the person who might be listening to this might say man, I'd be impressed just to get to $1 million, let alone, 20 million. But if I'm at 20 million, how do I want to get to 100 million?
It's interesting. Let me give you some statistics. There's 30 plus million small businesses in America, and they employ half of the workforce of America. So America was built on the concept of small business owners, and employing, half of the working class population. That's a pretty impressive statistic. Having said that, though, only 7% of all businesses started ever hit $1 million in revenue, and only 4% of those ever hit 10 million. And so truly, it's a unicorn that becomes, call it a $100 million business or $1 billion business. There's only 3,000 $1 billion businesses on the planet. So it's a small club for sure. And it's interesting because I've spent a lot of work, studying, this particular aspect. And I call it, it's almost like a Tesla car. It needs a second gear. It's great out of the hole, but it doesn't have a good top end. It needs a low high, shifter so that you can go 0 to 60 in the snap of a finger and then 60 to 150 in another snap of a finger with a low high gearbox. So an entrepreneur, to be successful, I hate to say it, but being anal retentive and a control freak helps people kind of get to that $1 million plus level. And I call it, I use an orchestra reference here. And it's kind of funny because I'm not a huge classical music guy, but people understand the concept of an orchestra. There's different sections. There's the woodwinds, there's the horns, there's the percussion. There's all these different sections of an orchestra. And the best player is the first chair player in each section of an orchestra. And they kind of lead the section. And entrepreneurs, to be successful, the anal retentive control freaks, they are the first chair player in every section of the orchestra. And they seem to top out at about 20 to 30 million, depending on the industry. And that's where control freak meets, I don't have any more bandwidth and I can't possibly grow my business any bigger. And they need that Tesla second gear. Elon, if you're listening to me out there, need that low high. They need to learn how to go from being the first chair player in an orchestra to being a conductor, to learn how to let go of the minutia and the detail, learn how to hire a team of people that they trust, empower, and motivate and inspire and get back. And then it's a beautiful sight when a person can make that transition, because that's when the company at 20 to 30 million takes off and goes to 100, or higher. And so, it's not, it's very tough work to start a business, to be successful. The odds are stacked against you to begin with. And at the same time, what it takes to be successful is that I was being a little facetious when I was saying the anal retentive control freak, but it's attention to detail. It's micromanaging. It's really making sure. I call it the Happy Meal experience. If you go anywhere in the country and you order a Happy Meal, you're going to get a red cardboard box with a cardboard hamburger, some apple slices, and a thing of apple juice or chocolate milk. It's very consistent. And so to create a business that can scale, consistency is important. Controls are important early on. The entrepreneurs get that. And then, as they find success, they need to learn how to do something which is totally and completely opposite of what they just did to build a business. And that's let go, hire good people, empower, become a person who is an inspirational leader to other people, can articulate a vision and paint it up there and create a shared aspiration that everybody wants to achieve. And then let people run and hire good people and run. And so I think that's the key to really busting out and creating a really big scalable business.
Your comment about the anal retentiveness. So I'm remembering. So I recently just finished up business school myself, and I remember we had this alumni come in. He's been incredibly successful. Actually, he was also a enlisted veteran in the Marines in Vietnam, but really fantastic guy. And he's bought and sold multiple companies. He's kind of known for being a turnaround specialist. And he would one of the things he was kind of cluing us in. He's like, listen, every time I get a new company, I would come in and what I would always do, one is I'd go through every single tiny expense and I would write every single check. And that was his personal thing to be that anal retentiveness. Cause he's I want to know where our money is going. And you start seeing where he's okay, do the executives all need, 10 different newspapers from across the country every single day? Do we really need that in that business? And it was a way for him to look at those fine details of the company, see where the money is going, understand kind of how the decision-making process were being made. And it was just an example that he gave us of this is how I step in and do that.
Well, let me give you my example to that because mine's very different from his, so that's one way to do it. But let me tell you something I've learned in 35 years working in service businesses. You can't store service or construction in a box and put it on a shelf. And if you cannot store your company's product, that really means your product is people. And if your product is people and you want to grow a business, I don't look at money at all. I don't look at revenue at all. I start with culture. I want to build an engaged workforce who will then, since they are my product, will take care of my client base. Clients love to be taken care of. They give us more stuff to do. Revenue rains from the sky. Growth takes care of itself. However, the way that I immerse into a company when I get there, and in all three cases, the companies have been in existence for 40 plus years by the time I got there. So these are not young startups. These are mature companies with hundreds of millions in revenue. And my job is to take something that's growing at 4 to 6% and get it to grow at 30+% every year permanently. And if you can do that, the company will quadruple in size every 5 years. If you're growing at 10%, which a lot of people think is a good number, it takes 7 years to double the size of a company, which is a long time. So you need a higher growth rate. So I need an engaged workforce. I focus on culture. But here's what I do. I take an employee census. So I ask HR, give me an employee census. We got 2,000 employees at the time, 3,000 when I left, but I want to know where the groups of employees are. So if I use that HVAC company as an example, we had a lot of service techs. We had a lot of engineers. We had a lot of construction workers. So I want to go out in the field, not undercover CEO. I hate that show because I think any CEO who can hide undercover amongst their employees, that is not a good CEO. That's not a person who's a lead from the trenches, servant leader, rah, take the hill, follow me kind of guy. And that's what I am. That's what the military built in me, as an enlisted and then later as an NCO. So from my perspective, it's okay. If I've got 100 engineers, 400 construction workers, 1,900 service techs, whatever the numbers are, I want to spend time with the groups of people and actually doing the jobs and watching them and talking to them to understand what the company really does for a living and what kind of culture it has that I'm inheriting, knowing that my product is people in a service business and I'm going to focus on culture. It's really important to understand so that when I get back to the boardroom and I'm looking at spreadsheets, I'm not looking at numbers in columns. I'm looking at people, human beings who are out in trucks or sitting in cubicles or working in a warehouse or a plant. And I'm understanding what they do for a living because I've walked in their shoes. And only then can I start to then create a strategic plan for what the future is going to look like. And certainly, I'm not knocking the person that you're talking about. I'm sure, at some point, everyone has to look at expense and what are we spending our money on and what are we doing? I just don't start there. I start with people, culture, jobs, and then that helps me paint vision, for the strategic plan for the next 5 years. And then I'm going to articulate that vision, be transparent as a leader, communicate the hell out of it. During COVID, we were an essential business. I would do a round table on Zoom, and I would literally have 1,000+ people tuning in, and that's how I was connecting with the people in the trenches, because we weren't traveling as much. We weren't going office to office. And so I was using Zoom in the new formats that we all started adopting during COVID. And, I had tons of engagement. And so that's how I attack a business myself.
I think that mentality is something that this audience very much will resonate with, right? Because we all have a memory of, the battalion commander, brigade commander, the general coming down, and you could always kind of tell a difference between like who's the person coming down just to get the dog and pony show and get all the troops rah-rah, and the guy or gal is coming down to like what is actually going on the ground here, like what does training actually look like what are my people actually experiencing. And we all could tell the difference between which one of those categories was going on, right? And every time the latter category came down, like the person who was like, I actually want to know what the hell is going on here and where the rubber's meeting the road. You're like, okay, you know what? I'm actually going to tell this person something. I'm going to tell them what's going on wrong or what's going on good here. And I'm confident that they actually kind of want to fix it versus the first person who just kind of wants to fluff their ego a little bit. I think it's such a great lesson that this audience will definitely resonate.
Boy, I got to tell you, I learned that lesson from a major general, guy named Richard Schultes, who led the 2nd Armored Division. When I became Soldier of the Year, he was almost like my grandfather, and he would take me around and I'd give speeches, at the World War II, reunion of the 2nd Armored Division, whatever, in Florida. It's like, he'd take me around. So we kind of became quasi friends to the extent a general and a sergeant can. But he would call me up and say, where are you going to be? What are you doing? Oh, we're going to the range, this day, or we're going over here, to do this training that day. He would just show up. He would show up sometimes at our training, and it really freaked out the chain of command because he wouldn't tell anybody. And I kind of learned that trick from him. And when I think back at it now, some light bulb just went off. When I go around riding around with people, I develop friendships with people in the trenches. They become my informal feedback loop. So when you are a general or a CEO, you're managing down. Sometimes the chain of command is telling you what you want to hear and buffering you from the reality of what's going on. And so I could sanity check what I'm getting from the staff, call it, by circumventing the staff and texting. I'd have people as a CEO in that refrigeration company that would still text me today, and they say, "Hey, what's up, brother? What are you doing? What's going on? How's your day?" It's like, and so I would develop relationships with people in the trenches, and that became what I called an informal feedback loop, which was critical when you're managing change to understanding what the reaction is in the trenches when you're potentially pushing too hard, and or the pace of change is moving too fast. I would develop this informal feedback loop, and it goes right back to what you just said.
Yeah, I'm specifically remembering. So it's actually a little bit of a touchy name, if you will. So Michael Flynn, his brother Charlie Flynn, was the deputy commanding officer for the 82nd when I was there. And I remember him coming down to our platoon. We were doing a defense. It was like midnight. We were an hour away from headquarters. And this guy shows up. And, I immediately started going into my brief of like, oh, here's how my platoon's arrayed, sir, and everything. And he's like, honestly, LT, I don't really care. And then just kind of walked around and just talked to each each and every one of my guys. And he's like, got
Yeah.
down on a knee and just chatted with them for a little while. And he couldn't have given less of a shit of how my defense was arrayed. He wanted to know, like, okay, is this training exercise? Because it was like a big thing. Is this going on and is this working? And like that was his real clue of, is this an effective training event that we got going on right now? And do I need to change anything?
Another military story is for me, if for those who remember challenge coins, every company I've gone to, I created a series of challenge coins, and employees, in the trenches valued those more than, virtually anything else. They became, like people had a cult following. And if you collected my entire set, you would get, a day off, money, and prizes and things like that. But, guys were collecting the challenge coins, and we had them for different civilian purposes. And, that was another thing I stole from the military, or borrowed from the military rather.
Yeah.
Good stories.
Well, I'm curious in your consulting practice now. Like let's say you bring on a new client. How often do you work with them? And there might be some scaling there based on the company, how often they want to work with you or something. Like what does it make a typical schedule with a CEO look like?
Yeah, so I have different engagement levels. Kind of my base engagement level is a weekly phone call for about an hour where I'm working with the CEOs on an individual basis, talking about their issues, their problems, helping educate them, on how to think about a problem, or potentially offering just advice, on things that they can do to attack it. So, for me, it's an hour a week is kind of where I start. I'm serving on 4 boards. On the boards that I'm on today, I not only do the normal board stuff, which is like a monthly business review, phone call, 90 minutes on Zoom, and then the quarterly board meeting where I fly in for a dinner, shake hands, kiss babies, eat food, go to a 4-hour board meeting the next morning, and then run to the airport to catch your flight home. I do that normal stuff, but I'm doing the weekly with the leadership team on the phone, oftentimes in person, monthly. Sometimes it's quarterly as well, but not during a board meeting. And so I go from a low level engagement, call it 52 hours a year, roughly, to several hundred hours a year. And I become kind of an extension of the leadership team, and I'm on site. And, I have an hourly rate that I charge, and I really think about all my engagements just based on time. I don't farm it out to a junior person. It's like you hire me, you get me. And so I base everything around time of engagement that's required. And, that's how I think about it. So I'm working with, again, CEOs of private equity backed portfolio companies. I'm working with private equity firms. I'm working with founders and founders who are building a business, probably going to transition at some point, which polite word to say, I'm going to sell a company at some point, and it's not that I'm going to end my career. I'm going to probably sell to a private equity firm. Why? Because private equity has $5 trillion in assets under management, and they've got $1.9 trillion in powder, which is cash committed, looking to buy companies right now. And 50% of all companies bought and sold on the planet are bought and sold to private equity. So there's a thirst for knowledge. I recently gave a room full of executives a basic 10-question quiz on private equity. These really basic questions could be answered in my first book, if you read it. And 99% of the room flunked. And the one person who passed in the entire room got a score of 60, or 6 out of 10. They got a D. So and then I started a 12-hour master class on private equity. And why they should care and pay attention is because half of every company bought and sold today is bought and sold to private equity. So I'm usually working with people who've never worked with private equity. Maybe they just sold their business. They're working with institutional capital for the first time, or it's a founder getting ready to work with institutional capital. Maybe they've been growing at 6 or 7%, but to get a good return, they need to grow at 30%. How do you do that? How do I do that when I've been running this company for 10 years and I've been growing at 6%? What's the magic to bend the growth curve? And so those are the types of projects that I work on. Buy and build, mergers and acquisitions, very common. A lot of people hire me to teach them, the art of doing mergers and acquisition, which is kind of one of my strengths from my 21-year career as a CEO. So that's kind of it. It's based on the hour. It's just me. You get me, and I base my rates on how much time a person needs, and I dig in and help them.
Wonderful. Well, Adam, we're winding down until about the last 10 minutes here or so, and I will be respectful of your time. So in a minute, I'm going to pass it back over to you, just providing, last thoughts, words of wisdom to the crowd, if you will. But before we do, it's a question I always ask my guests. You think back to your time in the Army, what was the best and or worst chow hall you ever ate at?
Oh, wow. Best or worst chow hall? Well, when you're in the field, let's start there. So I go back to the era of the end of CRATs and the beginning of MREs,
Yeah.
right?
I
So
was about to ask, was it like hardtack and salt pork or something still?
yeah,
But
yeah,
okay.
back in the Civil War, when I was a private, no, but so it started with CRATs, and I'm telling you,
Yeah.
this stuff probably had been in cans since the end of the Vietnam War. And so people, when you're going out in the field, always are very creative about how they put stuff together, and try to augment, that nasty CRAT or later the MREs. And, I remember a time where I'm out in the woods and immediately a couple of dudes in my squad, I think we called them hillbilly lovingly, guys from the hills of Kentucky and Tennessee, they would go out in the woods, we're putting up tents, doing whatever it is that we're doing, digging foxholes. And they would come back with like 2 or 3 snakes, like here's a 6-foot copperhead. Let's fry this thing up. Here's a rattlesnake. It's like they would go out and just come back with rabbits. And, so I would say some of the best times, would be when people were doing just fun, creative stuff to kind of cook a nice meal after you've been sitting in the woods for 30 days, smelling like you've been in the woods for 30 days. And, and then some of these creative home cooked meals. So I'm going to call that the best and the worst chow hall all in one.
I get that.
So yeah, it's raining, you're sitting in a foxhole. I remember, God, I want to say it was in Korea, but the same foxhole was the coldest place on earth I'd ever been and the hottest place on earth I've ever been in the same damn hole. How's that one?
Oh, I believe it. Well, Adam, this has been an awesome conversation. Really appreciate your time. Lots of good stuff in here for people to take away and learn. So before we until you close out, I just want to pass it back over to you. Provide any last thoughts, words of wisdom to the crowd as they're either looking down their transition from the military or maybe recently made the exit.
Yeah. Well, so for first of all, let me just say in general, from my perspective, profit and culture are not mutually exclusive. So if you're a business owner, a budding business owner, or a manager of people, you don't have to be a jerk to make money. You can take care of people, you can treat people well, you can inspire people, and make a lot of money for shareholders. You can do all of those things at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. So, as a guy who was a private, once upon a time, and then a CEO, who's made tens of millions of dollars, over the years, I can look back and say, I'm the same person today I was when I was, the 18-year-old private E1, sitting in a foxhole. And remember that, take the life lessons that you are building on today, take them with you, and as I said, I think in the military, when you're in the military, you spend all your time focused on how many days I got left. There's probably boots hanging on a telephone pole down by Fort Hood that I threw up there, a pair of jump boots that I threw up there, 35 years ago. It's probably still there flapping in the breeze. It's like, hey, embrace the suck, enjoy your time. You're going to remember it forever, and you're going to be proud that you were there. So, stop counting the days, enjoy the time you got left. When you get out, be a good steward to people in the world. I don't want to get religious, but, karma for me seems to come back. When I treat people well and I do right by others, good things happen to me. I'm not messing with that magic, so I've been very blessed in life. And I would say, set your bar high for yourself. And, a lot of people in this generation of soldier or airman or sailor or Marine, I think of my nephew who just got out a few years ago, 21 years in the Air Force, and he did security on bases and convoy security. He spent more than half his career in a combat zone. And PTSD is real, screwed him up, cost him his family. He was a police officer, cost him his career. It's you got 22 vets a day, committing suicide out there. You don't have to be alone. In today's world, you don't have to be alone. You can reach out, ask for help, and your brothers or sisters will be there for you. So don't keep stuff inside. Try to be good to others, and enjoy the time you've got left in the service. When you get out, set goals, and don't let anything stop you. Don't let anything get in your way. And and dream high. Set the bar high. It's good to have interim goals that you can see, touch, and feel. But man, I went from private E1 to CEO of a $1 billion company, over the course of about a 20-year time period, and then stayed there for 20 years. And so I would tell you, reach for the stars, be good to people. If you need help, get it. And hey, there's life after the military. You get out, the sun will come up the next day, and no one's going to be there to give you a free place to live and a free meal at the chow hall. So you damn well better get your ass in gear and figure out what that career is going to look like, and get busy. So that's my advice.
I love it. Every bit, every tidbit you threw in there, absolutely fantastic advice, and a sentiment that I've echoed a lot, and I've had a lot of other people echo on this show. Well, Adam, if people want to find out more about you and your practice, where can they go?
LinkedIn is a great place to find me. Adam ecoffey.com is also my website. My company's called the CEO Advisory Guru. So if you go to ceoadvisoryguru.com or adamecoffey.com, it'll take you to the same place. My books are on Amazon. Just type in Adam Coffey and they'll come up. Hey, reach out. I love hearing from people. I can't tell you how many relationships I've built with people that heard me on a podcast or read my books from all over the world. Every corner of the world, reach out to me on LinkedIn, and enjoy talking to people. So that's where you find me.
Awesome. And all those links for everyone listening will be in the show notes. Well, Adam, appreciate your time today. And for all of you still listening, please, like, subscribe, leave a review, and share the show with a friend. Adam, appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of your day. All right.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. And thank you to all your listeners out there. Hoo-ah!
Take care.